You're live, Mitch. You're all set to go.
Okay, we're ready to start? Wonderful. Thank you, Tracy. So, my name is Mitch Marinoff. I am a retired general contractor and carpenter. I am a murder suicide loss survivor. Having lost my mother and father in August of 1990, I currently serve as a team member for the Murder Suicide Loss Network, helping by facilitating support meetings, and now sit on our board for the nonprofit MSL Network Incorporated. Um, I faced my loss at a time when resources were scarce. The internet was a new tool with very limited information and not available to many. Having tried attending a few different support groups in person, not fitting into these groups, I was left with a feeling of profound sense of isolation. There was simply to say, no support groups for murder suicide. I decided to try to go on with my life with the help of a private therapist. However, after a few years, I found myself alone again. As a young adult, I chose to continue into my life. I lived in a deep, quiet shame for what my father had done, as well as suffering the loss of my mother, victim. Trying to let time go by, remove myself from the pain of my loss, not understanding the effects of PTSD. I spent the greater part of my adult life suffering from PTSD, not seeing how my life was spiraling downward. I can look back now and see the destruction that it caused, and I only wish I could understand PTSD sooner, how it was affecting my life. There came a time after I hit my 30-year anniversary, I searched the internet for anything I could find on support for murder suicide. Finally, there was something. I jumped at the chance and reached out to someone who might understand what I went through. And actually, as people think our group is new and groundbreaking, it's not as new as it seems. We are already in our fourth year. November will be our anniversary. November 2020, we started, Brittany and Sarah, doing peer to peer support group meetings. So, our group, Murder Suicide Loss, before it was Network, was started in 2020 by two women, Sarah and Brittany, who experienced murder suicide losses. Brittany wrote a piece, an essay for TAPS, the military suicide prevention organization, very detailed about her personal story. And Sarah, her losses prompted her to get a master's degree in social work, and she started a website which is up and running, mygriefconnection.org, where the information was posted about our support meetings. And together, these two women created a place online where someone can Google murder suicide support group and find a way to connect with other survivors. It had always been an interest of mine to meet other loss survivors. However, there was no place to turn. After 15 or 20 years out from my loss, I knew it was my destiny to meet and speak and help these type of loss survivors. When I was given the chance to finally speak to another survivor, I was overcome with emotion and realized my place was where I needed to be. I became a regular attendee of peer to peer support group meetings that the original founders had started. It was an amazing feeling to speak to loss survivors and be able to relate to almost all of their situations and feelings that was going on inside of them. After a few months, this support group went on a short break. That was due to the large number of survivors finding this place and overwhelming the people involved. As I came to find, most that found their way were devastated to feel that that group had come to an end. Fortunately, the group resumed a few months later with a small steering committee to help with the load, and I was lucky enough to be added to that committee. And I do my best to help run the group. As the group grew in numbers, we all found how great the challenges of running a peer to peer support group, as well as trying to be an advocate for the murder suicide loss community. The challenge of trying to keep this group going, have a separate professional life as well as a personal life, soon became overwhelming to many. In April of 2024, I reached out to Jenna and Connie to join me as administrators of this group. At that time, we launched a website and we have been a great team together, working towards the same goals. However, we bring a different skill set to the group. It's sad for me to say that suffering a loss of this nature is not only complicated, but life changing as well. I knew deep down my life was not a happy one, but took many years to come to terms with what had happened to me and try to become a positive force in the support community. Last year, or yes, early this year, I had the pleasure to meet Anne Marie Matulis and Tracy Minton. They are suicide survivors of ideation and trauma in their own way and are huge advocates in the suicide community. Anne Marie, co founder of Impacted Family and Friends and member of SPRC's Lived Experience Advisory Committee. Being determined at this point in my life to make a difference, I met up with Anne Marie at the Massachusetts Convention for the Prevention of Suicide in April 2024. This was my first real experience in person with the world of suicide prevention. The keynote speaker was Dr. Thomas Joyner, well-known author and expert on the murder-suicide topic. In the months leading up to this conference, Anne Marie was putting together some ideas how to get stories of murder-suicide loss more open to the public. Her creativity and imagination to bring murder-suicide awareness open is inspiring. At that time, myself and two of my former colleagues joined in a collaboration for a book that was going to be put out on murder-suicide. I am proud to say that this book has come to fruition. It has just been launched. It's on Amazon, available to all. It's titled The Untold Stories of Murder-Suicide. It's released today. Please look for it. I'm sure you will find the stories there compelling and hopefully helpful for all. And at this time, I'd like to introduce one of my colleagues, Connie Harrington, to take it away.
Thank you, Mitch. My name is Connie Harrington. I am a marketing consultant, I'm a writer, and I'm a mother. And I'm also a lost survivor of murder suicide. My survivor story began in 2016 when my former brother in law decided to end his own life and take his brother, my former husband, with him. It was devastating and shocking, and it caught me completely by surprise. The event also left me as a solo parent to two elementary age kids who lost their dad and their uncle. I knew a few things right away. I knew I was being dropped into the middle of a wilderness without a GPS, a map, or a compass, or even a path to follow. I knew that I would survive. I knew I had to navigate my kids on a path of stability and healing, and I knew one day I would share my story. Not long after the loss, I came across a quote that spoke to me by social work PhD and author Brené Brown. Our job is not to deny the story, but to defy the ending, to rise strong, recognize our story, and rumble with the truth until we get to a place where we think, yes, this is what happened. This is my truth, and I will choose how this story ends. Every survivor journey is different, but for me, acknowledging the truth of what happened was never not an option. I had two children who needed me to advocate for them and guide them, and that meant sharing our story over and over for years. I've spoken to police officers, victim witness coordinators, teachers, school administrators, school counselors, coaches, camp leaders, other parents, physicians, therapists, educational consultants, intake coordinators, insurance representatives, case managers, school board representatives, volunteers, local and state officials, and others. Over and over again, I had to say the awful truth of what happened to my family out loud. And so many of those conversations weren't especially trauma informed. I felt like I kept running into brick walls. I felt unseen, I felt alone, and I felt deeply hurt. If I had to count up those conversations, probably the number would reach eat into the thousands. But instead of helping me move forward and heal, those conversations kept me trapped and alone in that wilderness of grief. Then one day after our loss, I searched for a murder suicide support group. It wasn't the first time I'd looked. I was ready to be disappointed. But much to my surprise, I found one. I discovered one of the stories of one of our founders, Brittany Noble McCarthy, and how she described the loss of her father and her stepmother. For the first time, I felt a surge of hope, knowing that I wasn't alone. So I decided to reach out to her. I remember sending that first email and worrying that I would never hear back, but I did. That first conversation with Brittany was a turning point for me. Even though her story was different from mine, there was an instant kinship between us. Encouraged by that connection, I became a member of the murder suicide support group that she and other co founder Sarah Cobb co facilitated. And I joined my first support group a few weeks after that initial meeting with Brittany. It was a hard experience, but a meaningful one. Right after it ended, I emailed Brittany to thank her. I said, I feel more normal than I have in years. I found something that resonated with me in every survivor's story, even though none were like my own. I attended meetings for a while, paused for a while, and came back. There were always new faces and new stories, along with familiar people that I started to think of as an extended family. In early 2024, I received an email asking me if I would be willing to take on an expanded role with the group. I was asked to take on new member intakes. I said yes right away, even though I knew those conversations would be vulnerable and difficult. Soon, the group leadership composition changed, with Brittany and co-founder Sarah Cobb stepping aside, and my role changed again. I started co-facilitating groups and strategizing for the future with Mitch and Jenna. We became fast friends, and I've grown to see the two of them as my chosen family. Right away, we knew we needed to continue the groups that had become a source of strength and a beacon of hope for so many. We've settled into an every other week cadence, and we are committed to keep going. We meet survivors where they are. Some join us within weeks after a loss. Some find us years or decades after changing the journey of loss alone. Some hold a close bond with the actor in the event, some with the victim. Most lost two or sometimes more people that they loved. Sometimes people who come to us have lost a child, which adds a terrible layer to an already complicated grief experience. In some cases, we meet attempt survivors. Those people lost at least one person with another one or more who survived the incident. No matter the scenario, we hear over and over that these survivors felt they had nowhere else to go. They may have tried to attend a suicide loss group, but sensed that others felt uncomfortable with the murder that occurred. We've heard from some people that have attended murder victim family groups, but often they feel alone in those settings because the person who perpetrated the event was a stranger. In almost every instance we encounter, the loss occurred within families or close relationships between romantic partners or friends. Usually there is no anonymous perpetrator to blame. And for those mourning the loss of an actor in the event, we remind them that people are much more than their final act. We tell them the person they lost is worthy of love and grief. Often we hear from survivors searching for closure that's hard to find. They're trying to solve that elusive puzzle, the why behind the event. For most of us, the answer isn't clear. So the goal is learning to accept that we never really know. And ultimately, we all need to find our own why. And hopefully, we can all start to make meaning from the loss, even while acknowledging that it changed us to our cores and stays with us. Recently, we've taken steps into a new chapter. We're pursuing 501(c)(3) status to continue and expand our work with survivors. We've refined our purpose to focus on 3 primary areas. We build community by providing a welcoming space and peer companioning for those touched by murder-suicide, allowing survivors to express complex emotions safely and take steps towards healing. We engage in advocacy by building relationships with clinicians and experts to share lived experience insights that promote awareness building and research-based resource development. We foster understanding with the hope that all survivors who engage with us walk away with a tool, a resource, or a connection that supports and comforts them on their survivor journey. This event today is an important step forward for all of us. We've joined the small chorus of voices who are sharing their stories out loud. It is not easy, but we hope we can reduce the stigma that surrounds murder-suicide loss. We hope that we can blaze a trail for those who follow, so that instead of entering a dark wilderness of grief without a GPS, a map, or a compass, or even a path to follow, we're shining a light to guide others. I can say that being part of this group and working with Mitch and Jenna has provided the biggest step forward for me in my own personal healing journey. I feel like I've finally emerged from that wilderness into a new space of post-traumatic growth. And we're stepping out of our shadows and into our survivor mission. I'll conclude with another quote from Brené Brown that I discovered recently that sums up what I feel we are doing with this group. One day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will become someone else's survival guide. If you're a survivor or know someone who is, we encourage you to reach out. We'll hold space for you. We'll let you honor those that you lost. Your feelings are always safe with us, and you don't need to travel the journey of life after murder-suicide loss alone. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenna Howe.
Thank you, Connie. I'm Jenna. In 2022, I lost my mother and brother in a murder-suicide in Massachusetts. Before my losses, I was a doula. Now I'm a mother, writer, and advocate. I found this group shortly after my losses, so I survived most of the time since the losses knowing I wasn't alone. But I recall suffering a lack of community when our group took a 6-month hiatus a few months later, so I asked to help with the group to keep it going. Mitch, Connie, and I came together over a shared commitment to MSLN. We found healing through and purpose through service. We built a website, www.mslnetwork.org, to help survivors find us. It's the first website of its kind, as Mitch can attest to, searching for 30 years for something similar. There's information on how the group started and links to sign up to join our group or a newsletter, and there's a detailed resource page. Survivors of murder-suicide loss come to us seeking community with people who have experienced this complicated tragedy. As we've discovered, the only way to really understand murder-suicide loss is through the shared experience with other survivors. To join our support group, we request an intake Zoom call with 2 of our board members. This allows us to ensure we're a good fit for the survivor and the survivor's a good fit for us. This said, no matter the type of loss, whether it was a murder-suicide or there was an attempt, whether a person is surviving only one or both, or sometimes more than 2 people, whoever the survivor mourns, we accept everyone. This has not always been the case in the beginning of our group, but our board has decided it's incredibly important to support as many people as we can, because where else would they go? I'll give you a little bit of my personal experience here, but my mother was murdered 2 days before my brother, who murdered her, died. The definition of a murder-suicide includes a time frame of 2 days. Had my brother been unsuccessful in his first attempt to take his own life and later succeeded, he would have just been a murderer who died by suicide after. My family only just makes the definition of murder-suicide, and Brittany only just allowed me in the original group. And oh, how things would have been different if she hadn't let me in. In our intake calls, the board members share our stories of murder-suicide loss and hold space for the new survivor to share their story. This allows the survivor to share as much of their story as they want and know they can always come to our board members to talk about the details of their story. In group, we briefly share important aspects of our stories at the start of each meeting, but we generally do not go into more detailed stories so that one session does not become focused on only one member. That isn't to say we don't share details of our stories, just not all at once. Our meetings are informal and open. We allow survivors to come as often or as infrequently as they like, and until they tell us otherwise, they always receive an invitation. Our losses are much more complex than the sum of the parts, a suicide loss and a murder loss. Perhaps it's because murder-suicide survivors have lost more than one family member in a tragedy, or because someone is grieving a lost loved one whose final act was murder. But we also have members who are trying to humanize the loss of a loved one's killer, who's also deceased to suicide. It seems that no matter what the circumstances of our individual survivor's story, our survivors enjoy being together because they have had trouble finding space in suicide and murder support groups. We remind attendees we are not professionals in any capacity. We do not give legal, mental health, or any type of advice. In group, we talk about what has worked for us only in lieu of advice. There's another support group model currently being used in the state of Georgia, a 10-week program run by licensed social workers. We're currently investigating methodology, but are keeping our peer support or peer companioning model for now. Our board members take turns leading support group, and we each have a different way of leading despite a common opening script. Members fluctuate from large groups to small groups. Sometimes there's a smaller group or a bit more informal, and with a bigger group, we've got to raise our hand to speak and be mindful of each other's sharing time. We have recently become a nonprofit in order to offer more support to survivors of murder-suicide. We're working to understand both prevention and post-prevention to perhaps save some people from becoming survivors of a murder-suicide loss, while also diversifying our offerings and abilities to help those who do become survivors. We know training needs to be done for both prevention and post-prevention, and that survivors need both immediate and long-term support after a murder-suicide loss. Many in our group share our desire to step forward and tell their stories. We hope someday soon to put more stories so that new survivors can find us and will feel less alone. They may not relate to all stories, but perhaps reading the right one will give them the courage to join us or just to follow us through the beautiful social media work that Connie's been doing. Perhaps more survivors will want to wear a teal, white, and black ribbon, go to walks for suicide loss and prevention, share on social media or in their communities. Our goal is to show survivors they're not alone. They have family in our community who always has their back. It comes down to we treat others the way we would like to be treated. We remember, whether it was 36 or 2 years ago, what it was like to be alone and sometimes orphaned and with a magnitude of loss. As the days, weeks, and years go by, our feelings and questions ebb and flow, and other survivors understand. We become the people who truly understand what it's like to be in the news, to live in our communities, to be judged or be forgotten. And we want to reach out to that loved one, but they are no longer there. We can go to support meeting. When we want to yell or vent or question why, we can go to a support meeting. It doesn't matter your location, socioeconomic status, religion. All that matters is that we are survivors of murder-suicide loss, and we all understand. As today is Make a Difference Day, I want to speak one more time from experience. Elizabeth McCracken wrote, "Grief lasts longer than sympathy, which is one of the tragedies of grieving." There is something that would have made a big difference to me in the years since my losses. When I first lost my mother, then brother, in 2 days, everyone was texting, calling, sending love, and comforting meals. And then they stopped. Now on her birthday or his, or on the anniversary of their deaths, most people are no longer checking in to see how I am. Or some people use those days to post on Facebook about their sadness, but don't tag me and say, "I hope you're doing well, Jenna. I'm really sad for your losses." To actually make a difference to survivors, remember them, because we're the ones that are still here. The board meetings of members of MSLN remember, we're here for survivors, and we're committed to staying here and representing all survivors of murder-suicide loss.
Are we live? Okay. Oh, nicely done, ladies. You know, I'd like to sum this up with a huge thank you to Anne Marie and Tracy for including our group in today, the Make a Difference Day event. As I've watched today's events, other webinars, I thank you for making this happen. once again giving the MSL Network just another opportunity to reach out so those who may need us will find us. Thank you.